Why is Goblin Piledriver never sad? Because he has protection from the blues.
This video is sponsored by Cool Stuff Inc. with free weekly content and free shipping on orders over $150. You can save 5% site-wide by using the promo code MTGMudsta. And 401 Games, Canada's one-stop shop for trading cards, board games, and hobby supplies. They've got an amazing loyalty program and an easy-to-use and robust buy list. And if you use the promo code MTGMudsta, your first purchase of MTG sealed and singles will be 5% off. If you're looking for a direct way to help the channel, please consider joining my Patreon and becoming a member of the generic Goblin Gang. Hey gang, and welcome back. Today's game has some old friends and some new commander decks, with Arja, John, and Matt rejoining me. In today's game, Arja is playing Eriette, keeping City of Brass, Plains, Profane Tutor, Greed, Warehouse Tabby, Open the Armory, and Danathan, Capuchin Paragon. John is playing Ezuri Claw of Progress, keeping Immaculate Magistrate, Concordant Crossroads, Forest, Reliquary Tower, Elvish Archdruid, Master Biomancer, and Crown of Skemfar. Matt is playing his Sauron deck, keeping Swamp, Professional Facebreaker, Orcish Bowmaster, Dreadhorde Invasion, Canyon Slough, In the Darkness Bind Them, and an Arcane Signet. I have taken out my Vishgraz deck, keeping Skullclamp, Plains, Toxic Deluge, Grafted Exoskeleton, Plague Nurse, Twilight Mire, and a Godless Shrine. Arja wins the die roll and starts us off. He draws and plays a Windswept Heath, cracking it and losing one to go and find a Shockland. He then casts his Warehouse Tabby and passes. John draws and plays a Forest. Matt plays a tapped Canyon Slough. I draw and play a tapped Godless Shrine. Arja has a Plains for turn, and then pokes me for one with his Tabby. He then suspends a Profane Tutor and passes to John. John's got an Island for turn, and just passes after that. Similarly, Matt draws and plays a Swamp. I play a Black Gate, which comes in tapped, and pay 1 for a Skullclamp. Arja takes down his Profane Tutor and draws. He plays a City of Brass and then loses one from it to help cast Eriette. Going to combat, Arja hits me once more with the Tabby and passes after that. John draws and plays an Island. He casts a Branch Evolution and passes. During his end step, Matt flashes in Orcish Bowmaster and shoots the cat for 1. Matt draws and shocks in a Watery Grave. He then plays an Arcane Signet, and then a Dreadhorde Invasion, and passes. My turn only sees an Isolated Chapel come into play, and I pass after that. Arja gets to cast the Profane Tutor on his upkeep from Suspend, tutoring for a card, and then draws for turn. He casts a Clawing Torment and targets the Bowmaster to take it out. And then plays Lithoform Blight on John's Forest. Moving to combat, Arja swings Eriette at Matt for 2, who takes the hit. In his post-combat main phase, Arja then plays a Temple of Silence, which scries 1, and he then moves to his end step, draining everyone for 1 with the Eriette trigger. John draws and plays a Reliquary Tower. He then loses a life to the Lithoform Blight as he casts Ezuri and passes. Matt loses 1 and amasses 1 on his upkeep from the Dreadhorde Invasion, and then draws for turn. He plays out a Stormcard Coast, and then casts In the Darkness Bind Them, and makes a 3/3 Wraith token, and then the ring tempts him. The army becomes the Ring Bearer, and Matt moves to combat. He swings the army at Arja, who takes the 2, and after that, Matt passes. I draw and play a Twilight Mire. I then cast a Plague Nurse and pass turn. Arja has a Plains for turn, and then casts Open the Armory, going to find Rune of Mortality, which he then casts and enchants Ezuri with it, drawing a card as it enters. He then suits up my Plague Nurse with Griff's Boon, and he moves to his end step. This gets him an Eriette trigger, and he drains us for 3 and passes. John draws and plays Yavimaya. He then plays an Elvish Archdruid and gets an experience counter. He follows that up with Concordant Crossroads, and then goes to combat. He gets his Ezuri trigger, putting 2 +1/+1 counters onto the Archdruid. He doesn't declare any attacks though, and instead just passes. Matt loses 1, amasses 1, and draws. He then makes a Wraith off the Saga, and the Ring Temptation goes up by 1. Matt then plays a Verdant Catacombs as a land for turn, and then plays Professional Facebreaker, and then goes to combat. He swings a Wraith at Arja and I, and the army token goes at John. We all then take our hits, with Matt getting 3 treasure tokens from the Facebreaker seeing us get hit. He passes after that. I draw and play a Plains. I then cast Vishgraz, making 3 mites, and go to combat. I swing the Plague Nurse at Matt in the air, and he takes 4 and gains 2 poison counters. I pass to Arja after that. Arja draws and plays Danithic Capuchin. He then enchants her with all that glitters on her, but Matt responds by casting Bolt Bend, redirecting it to a zombie army. Arja follows that up with a Spirit Loop and enchants it onto my commander. He then moves to his end step, and his Eriette trigger drains us all for 5, and he passes turn. John draws and plays a Temple of Mystery, which comes in tapped and scries him 1. He plays a Master Biomancer, and then an Immaculate Magistrate, which comes in with 4 +1/+1 counters. Going to combat, John puts the Ezuri trigger onto the Master Biomancer, and after Arja declares no blocks, activates the Magistrate to add more counters to the Biomancer. Arja then takes the hit, and John passes. Matt's army continues to tick up, and Matt then draws and makes a Wraith token. He also gets to make his Facebreaker into the Ring Bearer, and then casts Sauron. Going to combat, he swings the army at me, and 2 Wraiths, Sauron, and the Facebreaker at Arja. We both take our hits, and Matt makes a treasure token, and the ring tempts him again. This has him discarding his hand and drawing 4. After combat, Matt gets his bling on, casting a Soul Ring, and then the One Ring, and then pays 1 for a Changeling Outcast, passing to me. I draw and play a Swamp. I then clamp a Might, drawing 2 cards, and then do it again. This finds me a Soul Ring of my own, which I cast and then clamp the Might. Moving to combat, I swing the Plague Nurse at John, dealing 4 and giving him 2 poison counters. Moving to my second main phase, I cast Toxic Deluge for 6, wiping the board except for Vishgraz, the Biomancer, and the army. With nothing else, I pass. Arja draws and plays a Swamp. He then replays Eriette and passes to his end step, draining us all for 3 and passes. John draws and plays a Reclamation Stage, which comes in and blows up Arja's Lithiform Blight on his land. He then goes to combat and swings the Biomancer at Arja. Arja takes the hit, and John passes, and during his end step, Matt activates the One Ring to draw a card. Matt amasses, loses 1 from his ring, and then loses 1 from the Dreadhorde invasion, and then draws for turn. He moves to his main phase, and his Saga finally pops off, and he takes a creature from each of us until the end of turn. He then plays Sulphur Falls, and recasts Sauron, who this time comes in with 12 +1/+1 counters, thanks to the Stolen Biomancer. He then activates the One Ring, drawing 2 cards, and then casts a Dark Ritual, which he then uses to help cast Demir's Signet, and he moves to combat. Matt swings the army and Sauron at Arja, and Eriette and the Biomancer at John. This has John and Arja both dying, and Matt gets tempted by the ring again. This has him discarding his hand, and draws 4, and then passes turn. I draw and play a Plains. I then play Drown and Ichor on the army, which doesn't kill it, but does allow me to proliferate. And then I put Skullclamp onto Vishgraz. I follow up with an Akroma's Will, and I go to combat. I swing Vishgraz at Matt, and he takes 15 total commander damage, and I gain 15 life. With nothing else, I pass to Matt. Matt continues to amass, and loses 2 off the ring, and then 1 from the invasion, and then draws. He activates the One Ring again, drawing 3, and then casts Hostile Negotiations. I decide to give him the face-up pile, and Matt then goes to combat. He swings out at me, and I chump Sauron with Vishgraz. Sauron is still big enough to take out my commander though, and I draw 2 from the Skullclamp as it dies, and Matt once more discards his hand and draws 4. In his post-combat main phase, Matt then casts a Bag of Holding, and then a Nightscape Familiar, and he passes to me. I cast an Enlightened Tutor on my upkeep to try and find an answer and spend a lot of time looking at what I can pick, and ultimately have to settle on a Staff of Completion. I then draw it for turn, and play a Fetid Heath, and then cast Glistening Sphere. As it comes in, I proliferate the poison counters on Matt. I then play the Staff of Completion, and an Eldrazi Displacer, and with nothing else, I pass. Matt amasses and loses 1 from the Dreadhorde Invasion, and then loses 4 from the Run Ring, and then draws for turn. He goes to combat, and swings out at me, and I chump Sauron again. However, the army connects, and between combat damage and the Ring Temptation trigger, this has me still taking exactly lethal, and Matt wins the game in combat. Game review time. This game was 53 minutes and 10 seconds, and unfortunately, I think if I hadn't clamped those mites, I might have actually been able to win this one. But that also means that I wouldn't have drawn 6 more cards, which is hard to say because I don't exactly remember what I drew, but I'm pretty sure it's what kept me in the game. Sadly, I think this is going to be one of the last games you see with Vishgraz, at least my deck version of it, as I'm building him into Miracle now. John's Ezuri deck was more focused on elves than it was combo, and he doesn't run cards like Sage of Hours. We got to see some pretty nasty stuff, although he was kicking himself after casting the Reclamation Sage and not blowing up In the Darkness Bind them. Our Eriette deck was really cool, and I actually want to really build this commander, although I might wait a little while since he has one. Playing a bunch of auras and goading creatures, not to mention draining his opponents, really adds up quickly. And I think before the board wipe, he was in a pretty decent position with a lot of creatures having to swing at his opponents and not him. Matt's Sauron deck was pretty brutal, and considering he had Orcish Bowmasters in his opening hand, I was really relieved that it died so early, since it can get really out of hand in an EDH game. I think what really helped in this game was that Dreadhorde Invasion, which is always a card that I see likened to Bitter Blossom. While Bitter Blossom lets you go wide, the Invasion lets you go tall, and it really mattered in this game. This video wouldn't be possible without the help from my sponsors, Cool Stuff Inc., Original Magic Art, and Alter Sleeves. But it definitely wouldn't be possible without the help from you, the viewers, and my patrons. So I just want to say thank you for watching, and to remember, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.